All right. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining me. Really excited to kind of learn a little bit more about your whole thinking on the space. I think there's a lot of cool stuff we can talk about here, but maybe we could get started by just learning a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I used to be a partner in a branding agency. So I was sort of doing branding and positioning for all sorts of companies, a lot of B2B SaaS companies, and really helping them to sort of execute that positioning. And then a little bit over 2.5 years ago, I started leading marketing for Pandium, which is an integration marketplace as a service. So, sort of an integration platform built to power ecosystems instead of workflow automation. And, through that, in the last 2.5 years, I've really worked with dozens of tech partner programs to kind of help them to really scale out their tech partner programs and really at that intersection of partnerships, product, and engineering, and sort of working to keep those aligned and working together and really, drive the revenue that you can drive from tech partnerships when those things are aligned, and also to be able to track that impact. I know a lot of organizations are still struggling with, we have these great tech partnerships. We know customers like the integrations, but we can't quite show that there's like a retention impact, an upsell impact. So we really sort of help companies to put that in place.
Yeah, the impact thing is really interesting. We saw something similar where at Amplitude, any user that was using one of our integrations had a significantly higher likelihood of being a like long term retained user in the product, and so like it seemed really natural to us on the partnerships team that was something like we want to go out and promote our integrations as much as we can to our users and really like juice up retention and expansion. But there was definitely some, I would say, I don't want to say friction, but like challenges with collaboration between the product team and the partnerships team, and like kind of getting on the same page with the roadmap and everything else. And you kind of alluded to having some of those conversations, like where you're based. I imagine you're like really in the middle of that partnerships and product kind of conversation. Like, tell me a little bit about those dynamics and how you've kind of experienced those at Pandium.
Yeah, so Pandium as a product is really used by tech partnerships, product and engineering. So we definitely kind of live in that intersection. But I think your point about the roadmap is huge. Like one pain point we really see to this day, and I think it's gotten a little bit better in the last 3 years, but partnerships people coming to us saying, we have these great partnerships. The other partner team's excited. We're ready to roll this out, but neither of us can get the resources to build this integration. And I think that's such a common pain point. And part of it is that you don't have that cross-functional alignment. I think in partnerships right now, we're all talking about like, how do you convince executive leadership to be ecosystem first, right? And how do you get that to be implemented across the organization? And that's an important conversation, but it really in a lot of organizations it hasn't happened yet. And I think that the product and engineering departments, they're really focused on that core product and they look at this as kind of a distraction. So what we like to help companies to do is, how do you get it so you have one roadmap, right? You have that product and ecosystem roadmap, and these things are not only growing in sync internally, but with your partners, right? Because ultimately, we're all trying to serve the customer, and the customer doesn't really care who owns what. They want to have a good experience. And so, if your product ceases to sort of be sensibly aligned with your partner products, you're doing either redundant functionality or you didn't update your integration, and so it no longer does something that it would need to do to work well, then the customer is going to start to have a bad experience. So I think, we've definitely seen more companies sort of being aware of that. And I think part of the flip side is customers are becoming a little bit more savvy. I think 3 to 5 years ago, a customer pre-purchase would just say like, do you have a Salesforce integration? And they'd be like, yeah, we do. And then 6 months later, after they bought, they'd be like, wait a second, this is only moving my context one way and that's all it will do. And like, it doesn't meet my needs. But I think we've seen the market starting to mature and customers are asking more questions, right? They're like actually scoping this stuff out and saying, okay, you have a Salesforce integration, but does it actually move data bi-directionally? Does it, sync the deal field, not just the contact field? And those sort of questions, which really require SaaS companies to create that alignment with their partners and internally.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think like I'd love to dig in a little bit more on the journey from we're building integrations to a marketplace. Because I think like the marketplace is like on that maturity journey is really like, hey, eh, we're solving a problem for the customer. Maybe we're solving problems for prospective customers, like with these other integrations. Then it's like, hey, we think we can maybe do some like go to market with these integrations as well. And then it's like partners. Then it's like, hey, we really want to like monetize and be known for this marketplace. And that seems like quite a journey of maturity. And I think that's quite often why people get stuck in like the friction with product and engineering is that those initial integrations obviously live with the product engineering team. Like, how do you see that maturity journey? Like, can everyone just start on day one with a marketplace as part of their like integration roadmap, or do they have to check some of those initial early stage boxes first?
Yeah, so I think one important distinction to draw is so people have marketplaces on their public websites, right? And they might call them integration marketplace or app marketplace, and maybe you click in and you can get information about the company. I think that's the earliest stage marketplace, right? You like put up that partner page tile and anyone can see all the integrations that you have. And I think that's something that can be done without engineering or product, right? Because it's really a marketing exercise. And it can be useful, right? Because it can be a mechanism for discovery for your partners. So you put that up, your partners start getting leads. They're like, oh, I haven't heard of this cool tool. They go over to the site and you can track that. And so I think that's the first step of a marketplace. The second step of a marketplace is one that is in-app, right? And that actually requires engineering and product resources because and this is what Pandy empowers is that in-app experience. We can also power the app out of the app, but really what we're focused on is the in-app because basically that means you as a customer need to be recognized, right? So you can see the integrations that you've already installed and you can actually install the integrations. And I think that's the second level marketplace. And then sort of the most mature one is one that's transactional.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that would usually need to be in-app because then the customer is installing it. It's being paid on their account, however you want to process it. And the interesting thing, I think, sort of where we are in the market, I'm currently doing this huge research project on 600 different SaaS companies at different stages of growth. And I'm looking at their APIs and their integration marketplaces and whether or not they have a public marketplace and whether or not they have an in-app marketplace. And most of the so the 100 largest SaaS companies, the vast majority have a public marketplace and have an in-app marketplace. But then moving down to the Series D companies, even the majority don't have an in-app marketplace, although the majority of them do have a public marketplace. And I think that's for what we're talking about because the in-app marketplace requires product and engineering resources. It's the partnership person can't just go out and do it, right? They need that buy-in from the organization. And the other thing I will say is when you look at the largest SaaS companies, I would say about a third of them are monetized or transactional marketplaces themselves. And then when you move down, even into the Series D, most of them aren't. Now, that doesn't mean they're not taking a revenue share. Like we have plenty of clients who use the analytics and visibility around sending leads to their partners to take a revenue share, but the marketplace itself is not processing the payment. And I think we're kind of really in a state of uncertainty market-wide. Like Shopify recently just said, we're not going to take a revenue share off the first million anymore for our app partners. Google Cloud just lowered their rev share that they're taking. So I don't think we're at a place of standardization around this. I think this is something that's going to be worked out sort of in the next 3 to 5 years around, when can you take a revenue share? And also, the transactional nature of the marketplace has to do more with how the customer wants to be buying. From their side, like when you look at an ecosystem like Shopify, if I'm like a small to medium sized merchant, like there's a lot of value in me not managing 15 to 20 different marketing and sales and checkout carts and loyalty apps, and being able to do that all through Shopify is really adding value to the customer. But by that logic, the shopping cart may be a very large or mid-market size SaaS company, but it wouldn't make sense for them to offer that same capability because the merchant only wants to be purchasing through so many platforms or venues. So, how that will settle out with the revenue share is interesting because you do have a lot of SaaS companies who have larger partners, but then they have sort of smaller partners that are around them. So they might be able to take rev shares from those partners and even transact on their behalf. But then they're in these larger marketplaces and they're being purchased through those marketplaces.
Totally. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I think there's some inflection point from a volume perspective where you can transact through a marketplace like that, where like you have to have a certain amount of customers or users or something where there's like, okay, there's enough volume here where it makes sense that people are going to make purchases through your marketplace or platform. And I really agree with you that like if you're not at that volume yet, that like having that in-app experience for the user is so important, to be able to like see what they're using, how they're using it, like what's available to them. Like tell me a little bit about the like with partnerships, people going to the product team and saying, hey, like we think we should develop this in-app marketplace. Like what is some of the impact or some of the business like business value that they're kind of talking about to justify the work that needs to happen on the product and engineering side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, some value that you can sort of put forth to your leadership team. And then there's other value that you can put forth specifically to your product team in terms of what they care about most. And when you're talking to leadership, I think, one of the key things is that you can take more of a revenue share, because if you have a decent sized customer base, your customers are going to be discovering partner products in that marketplace. If you don't have that centralized thing, I mean, a lot of times customers aren't going back to your public website and looking at your integration page or diving into your support docs. They're using the app. And if they go to the app store or app marketplace inside, they're going to see, and if you do it well, you'll have different categories. They can click, they can explore. They're going to discover things that they wouldn't otherwise discover. And I think that, you can take a rev share off of that. You have the tracking to do that. So I think for leadership, that's really valuable because that's just dollars coming in that wouldn't otherwise be coming in. I think from the product person's perspective, one thing to really drill down is the user experience, right? So like from the customer side, like, I'm a HubSpot user, and I think them having an app store that as a customer, I can just go in and find what I need in order to like make my job easier and more efficient. Like that's a huge value to me. And then as we were saying earlier, me being able to discover those tools easily, and then also once I install them and use them, then I end up not only, in most cases using those integrations, but also using the product more because they're essentially adding more robust functionality and it's more useful to me in my job. So I think really, saying, hey, product team, if we build this out, they're going to be discovering more tools. We're going to get higher customer satisfaction. We're going to get more integration usage, but that's going to lead to more product usage. Like your other features will potentially be used more. And I think, those are product's core goals. So I think that's going to be more compelling to them if you can say, okay, our customers are going to have a better user experience. Like they're going to enjoy our product more and get more out of it. Like that's a really compelling argument to a product person. And I think the marketplace makes that much easier because, you know, there's thousands of SaaS tools. Most organizations are using at least 100 different SaaS tools. So you need to make it as easy as possible for customers to find those integrations. Or a lot of times it's just they just don't have time.
Yeah. Yeah, and is there like a split between, hey, these are integrations that are so core to what we're doing that we have to build them ourselves because like the use cases are so nuanced that like a like a 80/20 or something, or like can people just do absolutely everything through the Pandium platform, or what do you generally see with customers?
Yeah, so Pandium as a platform is designed to enable the native integration experience. So you might have heard of like Tray embedded or
Hmm.
Workato embedded. Those are also integration platforms that you can use to power your ecosystem, but they have very thick connectors. So they sort of had a mediated integration experience. So they'll sort of have these visual builders that sort of wrap the code and really define the integration. And I think that the reason Pandium was built the way that it was is for the reason that you're saying, which is that native integrations where you're taking the API of both companies and letting them directly interact, and whether you're building that or your partner is building that business logic, that's going to enable you to provide the most custom experience for your customers. And I think that regardless of Pandium as a platform, it's absolutely a must that the integrations that are most important to your customers, that they're natively built, whether it's by you or your partner, ideally in collaboration,
Hmm.
because, when you have those more complex integrations, you really need not only the flexibility to design it specifically around what your customers are looking to use it for, but also the agility to update it. So if you use some middleware that it has like very defined connectors, then you really are dependent on them to update those as the APIs and products are updated. And now they're not going to let important integrations break. So it's not an issue of like the customer can't access it's more that, okay, this product feature was added, or now they opened up their API with like two more resource objects, and customers are clamoring for that use case, but you're waiting for them to update their platform because they're trying to maintain, 1,000 different connectors. And that's why I think having a native experience, whether it's running on Pandium or just running in house, when I prioritize those like top five integrations, it's really what you need to do. And you can see that when you even look at large SaaS companies, right? Like something like Shopify has, 1,000 partners building integrations to them, which is great, right? But they still build integrations. Like Salesforce still has integrations. HubSpot has integrations that they own. And it's for that reason you're saying, like the ones that are really key to the customer experience, they want to keep that control over the user experience and make sure it's what their customers want.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, and like I think the holy grail for most companies is what you described, where it's like, hey, we build and manage like the key integrations, and then everyone else builds on top of our API for every, like that's what I think every product and engineering team would like. And I've been in this situations a few times where they're like, oh, you need to build on our API, and then we're like, but you need to build on our API, like, and there's this like kind of thing going on there. Like what I hear from engineering leaders all the time is like, hey, everyone's API documentation sucks, and like, and it's like we would build it if we could make any sense of their API documentation. Like, what are some of the other pain points that people run into when they're trying to build and maintain integrations as they're kind of building out this marketplace strategy?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, and it is definitely still a pain point. I think the interesting thing is, again, and this is something very new, probably the last 3 years, you've really seen the market sort of move towards a common standard, and that's, most SaaS companies are using REST APIs now, so more and more developers are familiar with that. Now, the largest SaaS companies will also have like SOAP, GraphQL, and they'll have options, right? And I think that, a common pain point is APIs that either don't follow that standard, so they're trying to do something different or weird, which you really shouldn't do. You really should try to keep your data models, the way you're sort of categorizing your data, in line with your ecosystem. And this goes back to the collaboration that we were talking about, because developers don't want to learn something new. They're not experts in your system. Your system is not going to be their full-time job. So they want to be able to get in, learn what they need to learn and build it as quickly as possible, which is obviously a win for the partnerships person too, right? Um, so I think another sort of common thing in the developer experience that is falling down is companies aren't offering SDKs, which are basically a way that developers can more easily use that API. So instead of having to sort of build it from scratch or translate it essentially into whatever language they're coding in at their organization, the SDK means you can essentially just hit the ground running. Like, it's already translated for you, and it's much easier to get from like 0 to 100. And you do see most of the large companies are offering SDKs. I think younger SaaS companies are still trying to figure how to do it, and also update it, because once you offer it, you have to update it with your API. But I think that's something that's changing, and I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see more and more companies rolling that out earlier in the process. And I think it's one of those things where what you're talking about in that conversation is, it's a type of thing where if you roll it out, yes, it costs resources to build and maintain it, but if it enables like 10 companies to build integrations to you versus you having to build those 10 integrations, then the ROI is definitely there. So yeah, I think the other thing is, any kind of wonky practice, like, part of the integrations is how you're authenticating between systems. And we are moving towards this OAuth 2 standard, but there's still, lots of companies who kind of make it cumbersome. They're like, get this API key in this weird field and do it in the body. And it's just something that developers don't feel is, secure, and they don't want to mess with it. It's not what they're expecting. And I think that's something that is also shifting, but a lot of companies just aren't there yet. But I do think that these standards are continuing to coalesce with the rise of ecosystems, and I think the more that we have these common standards of interoperability that overrun any particular SaaS company, the more this sort of pain point of like, that's going to take me 10 months to build that integration, it's going to be reduced.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so, like, I've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing product teams, and they really care about the UI and like how the user is interacting with the product in general. And I can imagine it being really difficult for them to like relinquish control of a section of the product, like from a design, from a product perspective. Like, so for like as a Pandium customer, like, does someone then like does a product manager still kind of like own the marketplace, or like how does that normally run with customers?
Yeah, it's normally is a product person
Hmm.
who sort of, oversees both the marketplace and the sort of the business logic of the integrations. And Pandium basically, makes it easy for developers to sort of write a YAML file that we will then present as a UI to the customers, and a product manager is really overseeing those experiences. Now, you'll have partner marketers, and partners on the other side will be partner marketers submitting sort of the information in the marketplace around like, here's what it does, here's how you use it, here's some images of it. But really, it is managed and owned by the product person, because to your point, it's in the product, it's part of that user experience, and I think that they are really passionate about that, and it's really important to them. So to me, it does make sense that that sort of is where it's owned. And then the partnership people are obviously really focused on like, okay, how do we translate this into go to market relationships, how do we make sure we're getting the referrals we need, and showing the business impact, which is important. But in sort of the day to day, it's usually the product person who's managing it all.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I only at like a really, really, really large scale, I think does a marketplace become a business line again. Like even if you think about like the App Store, for instance, like the or like the Google Play Store, like the those things are business lines now, and and Apple talks a ton about their services and about the App Store being like a driver of revenue for them. But like for a very long time, that was a developer ecosystem, and it was built and managed by developer teams. And over time, they've realized, hey, this is a business function that needs to be run by business teams, or at least like heavily influenced by business teams. And so it's interesting to kind of for us to kind of see how this will evolve in smaller, like mid-sized teams.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, even some large ecosystems, right? Like HubSpot's not currently monetized their marketplace, or Slack too. And both of them have enough interest that they probably could. But I think that they're sort of thinking, hey, let's drive an open ecosystem. The value that we're getting from keeping it opening and keeping those small players coming in and like trying to build on us is worth it more now than like extracting out that money from partners. But I definitely think it's something that is in flux, and you see it in like the B2C side, right? Like Apple has faced all this like backlash on their high rev share that they were taking from developers, and clearly that was not like in stasis. So I think that's still evolving to reach that point where like both sides feel like it's a win-win. And I think in B2B SaaS, it's even more in flux in terms of like how transactional is this marketplace going to be? Where are people going to be buying? And then the second layer, which is like who's giving who a revenue share and for what.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think most companies right now are still in the stage of just like, my customer's asking for this integration, so I'm going to build it, and really far away from even having to worry about that stuff. I think the thing that we talk about quite a lot that's really attractive about building a marketplace is it is like the definition of category leadership for a tech company. Like you don't become a Salesforce or an Adobe or like you name it unless you own the ecosystem around it. And you have to like the only way you do that is by really owning the integrations and the marketplace. And so like I think people are kind of coming around to that idea, especially as more and more more and more companies are showing that that is like the kind of the construct in which they're building their ecosystem. And so I think it's a huge like a huge opportunity that you're kind of building into. So we talked a little bit about like impact a couple of times and how the partner teams are kind of on hand to be tracking the kind of business impact of these marketplaces and that strategy. Like how, like, tell us a little bit more about some of the things some of the impact that you're seeing, like some of the key metrics that people are looking at this to drive, and like how people are driving this stuff. Is it in product notifications? Is it customer success teams like reaching out to people if they're not using integrations? Like, is it the partnerships team doing co-marketing? Like, how does that come about?
Yeah, I think in sort of the most like ecosystem led growth organizations, you definitely, exactly as you're saying, sort of see it run through the entire organization, which kind of, starts with co-marketing, right? Like just circulating the idea of that integration. And it's very product marketing heavy, like really showing, what you can do. Because the end of the day is like an integration is another app, right? Like it is its own app, and really it's sort of something that what you can do with both systems is greater than any individual system. So essentially just getting people excited about it starting at that prospect stage, but then also, sales being in tune to like it as an option, like being educated enough. And I think organizations who have this well executed are having, regular meetings with sales, whether it's monthly or quarterly. They're sending out newsletters, making sure that they're updated and keeping it simple, right? Like salespeople are focused on their sales. They have a lot on their plate. So you don't want to try to dive down into details on every integration, but, really, and if you have salespeople that focus on specific verticals, you can do the research to understand which integrations the people they're selling to would be using and try to segment and letting them know, hey, look at what people can do. And that should be a two-way street, right? Like, because salespeople are talking to prospects all the time. They're hearing what prospects are looking for, because a lot of times, if there's not a particular integration, it's a deal breaker. And obviously, salespeople want to close deals. So I think the two-way on that is making sure you're getting that information, taking in their feedback, and then saying, okay, like, we're going to prioritize this and get this built. But, if sales sort of like put it forward during the sales process, it can not only like accelerate the sales cycle, but also, get prospects more excited and get it so that when they're handed off to CS, they're putting that into implementation as they onboard onto the tool. They're like setting that all up initially, and which is just going to ultimately drive usage and drive retention. So, on the flip side, I think CS being educated for the same reason. If a customer comes to them with a pain point, if there's an integration solution, CS being able to say, oh, we have an integration for that. Like, here's how you can fix that. And let me help you. And let me tell you more about it. I think that's really important. And then also making sure that CS can help with the integrations. So, and really have the information. So, like, if your partner builds an integration and they're committed to support it, your CS team isn't necessarily going to be supported, but they should at least have that person's contact information and say, hey, we didn't build this. Here's, Bob, contact him. He will help you fix this problem. Because at the end of the day, the customer is holding you responsible, even if you're clear that someone else built it. Like, they got it through you. They're just trying to have a good experience. They're not really. They just want their problem solved. So making sure CS sort of has that. But yeah, and as you said, like, I think in product, not only notifications can be a way to like feature partners, which can be like a huge value add to them because it can drive more customers. And also thinking about like where within the app you might want to feature something. So you have your marketplace, right? Like, where people can go discover different things. But sometimes it really makes sense to have like, an integration within an app. For example, like, I use HubSpot, and when you are in their email builder and you try to add an image, they have a little design with Canva button embedded within that builder. And, sometimes that makes sense. And I think that that's, a huge benefit to the partner. Like, I'm sure Canva's thrilled that they're being surfaced to all these customers many of who probably don't use Canva. I already use Canva, but, that makes me more likely to use Canva because it's right there and I can just click on it. And I think that thinking thoughtfully as an organization, like, this can be a win-win-win because it can provide a better experience to the customer. It can get my partner more customers, which they of course love. And then it can drive up retention for me, even if I'm not taking a rev share from my other partner. So yeah, I think those are, a lot of the ways you can sort of weave the integration experience throughout all these different departments in a way that really is going to drive revenue and retention and really just help your bottom line as an organization.
Yeah, I think at Amplitude we spent so much time championing retention as like the most important metric for the business, and people have really come around to how important retention is. Like even in 2017, 2016, people didn't seem to really spend as much time measuring retention of their product as they did like new user acquisition. And I think the tables have turned on that a little bit, which is really, really cool to see.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think the last stat I saw is something like it's 5 to 6 times more expensive to get like a new dollar through a new logo than off of your current customers. So like, I think people are like, oh, that makes sense. Then I will focus more on that. And I also think with like this product led growth mentality, that's kind of shifted a lot of thinking. Like, regardless of whether organizations have explicitly adopted that as a philosophy, it's definitely had a big impact on how we're all thinking. And I think that sort of mentality is very like pro retention, because it's
Yeah.
very much about like, let's get customers in here and let's make sure they're having a really good experience.
Yeah, yeah, it's really like building a product that you're proud enough of that you'll let people try it out, like it sounds funny, everyone's like, "Oh, isn't that just freemium or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, it is. Like whatever you want to call it is whatever you want to call it." But like people weren't doing that a little while ago, and people wouldn't let you see the product in real life until you'd signed the contract, and until you'd gone through like 90 days of implementation and training. Yeah, so I love it. So we've talked about we talked about retention. We also talked about like a rev share or like a clawback, from a marketplace. Something we haven't talked about yet is like expansion through integrations, and like at Amplitude we had this great partnership with Braze where on both sides we had really like a monetized integration where if you wanted to send cohorts out of Amplitude into a marketing automation tool like Braze, then that was a paid integration. And likewise, if you wanted to be able to send that data back into Amplitude or anywhere else from Braze, that was like a paid integration on their side. And like Crossbeam, for instance, I believe a lot of their premium functionality is around their integrations that they have. And so there does feel like there's kind of an expansion or like this kind of product led expansion motion that's available through integrations as well. Like what's been your experience around like monetization of integrations from that perspective?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I've done a lot of research on this. A while back, I looked at 1,000 SaaS companies, the 1,000 fastest growing SaaS companies, to see what their models were, and more recently, I've looked at the top 100, as I was saying, and I think that the most common model is to put the integrations, especially the more robust ones, whether they're to like a CRM or ERP, on higher paid plans. And I think the nice thing about that, from like a tracking perspective, is you can really like in app, you can have like an upgrade button next to the integration in the marketplace so that you can track like, hey, customers clicked on that and then they upgraded their plan. And that really can show, hey, people are upgrading because of this. And I think that that is definitely a model that customers are aware of. It's almost looking at as like a premium feature, essentially. But I will say there is it's definitely the minority, but you do see integrations being sold as paid add-ons. So like you'll have like a normal plan and then you can just add that on. And whether that's through like the number of API calls, if you have usage-based pricing in the first place, or if you're on like a monthly plan or an annual plan, it might just be an additional like $400 a month. I think customers are not as used to that plan, so it can be a little tough in that. The obvious plus side for tech partnerships teams is that they can track and say, "Hey, look, we built this integration, and this is how much revenue it's bringing in every year," and that's nice to have, right? And I think that it can show, hey, customers really do value this, and it is really increasing people's willingness to pay. So I think that's the plus side of it. Yeah, I mean those are the only ways of like I've seen of like directly sort of monetizing integrations. Obviously, people with their tech partners have various like arrangements in terms of how they're taking money from each other. But I think in terms of like the customer facing, it's often on the higher paid plans. That's the most common thing. But then sometimes you do have these, add-ons or for purchase integrations or extensions, once you become a platform where you just have extensions that don't even run to anything else. They're just totally on top of the platform.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think like the just that base, hey, this is going to increase adoption, it's going to drive retention, like it makes the product more sticky, is like a really strong value point, value prop. And I think one other thing that I've seen people do is prioritize integrations that drive more usage of the, like from a volume usage perspective, like Braze, for instance. Again, that I like their volume is going to increase if people are sending data from like cohorts into Amplitude, into Braze from Amplitude, or like, another great partner of ours at Amplitude was Segment, and mParticle, and their CDPs, like they're collecting event-based data. Like if people are getting value from that data, they're likely to be wanting to track more events and like send them into more places. And so like just increasing that adoption and stickiness, I think overall does, with at least at Amplitude, we saw drove a bunch of expansion of the product. Like hard to say, hey, this is causal necessarily, but it's like very highly correlated, at least that we saw.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen that, and I see that in the market more broadly, that that's happening. But I think that's a good point about usage-based pricing, and I think companies that are running usage-based pricing, like they can almost more easily track it to a specific dollar number. While I think people who are doing subscriptions can say, "Hey, we studied these cohorts of customers that have similar characteristics joined at the same time, and the people who are using 5 to more integrations are using the products 20 to 25 times more, but there's not a dollar amount necessarily attached to that." While if you have usage-based pricing, you might be able to say they're spending, $100,000 more a month on average, which, numbers always talk when you're
Yeah.
trying to get leadership on board. So I think that is a nice like side effect of the usage-based pricing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's no surprise that AWS and Twilio and Snowflake, like some of these companies that are the biggest usage-based pricing models, also are ones that are like have massive partnerships teams and a lot of integrations, because I think they figured that stuff out. It's very smart. I mean, it sounds like you spent a bunch of time researching startups in general. Like, what other kind of interesting things did you discover in all of this research that you do?
I mean, I think, from the more technical side, I think it was interesting to see that, some of the technical things are still all over the place. Sort of, for an example, the way people are rate limiting, which is often another pain point in from the developer side, is like, if someone doesn't have a bulk endpoint, then you can often very easily run up against the restrictions, which would then, kill the integration. And I think that people were sort of all over the place and what their rate limits were. Some of them weren't disclosed; they were just like, "You'll find out when you find out." So I think, and then another thing, like, even though most people are using the REST APIs, people aren't using some of the terminology the same. So, like, there's these common actions that you can take with the API that's in a REST style, and like put and patch are two that are kind of similar, which essentially are like, I'm going to edit something in that other system, but people were using them interchangeably and very inconsistently, which, these are minor things, but ultimately, as we were talking about earlier, really goes to how much time it's going to take developers to learn the nuances of your system and execute on that. I think another interesting thing from a more tech partnership side that I saw is, in terms of like, once people have like a program to kind of, address the long tail, where we are in terms of like how open those programs are. So like some like say Adobe, right? Like you can have a 6 months trial to be in their program, but then you need to pay $10,000 a year to get to like access your sandbox. Um, and then other ones like Intuit and QuickBooks Online, right? Like you just need to sign up with a personal email, and you can get your own developer account, you can build an app. And I think that seeing the sort of the wide spectrum of where we are, from like, even like Adobe has a very developed ecosystem, right? They're quite large, but they are still put somewhat of that hurdle in front of the partners to, and I think there's reasons, right? Like there's a trade-off. Like that $10,000 is saying that you're serious about this, you're invested in this, you're going to build something quality. On the flip side, the advantage of the QuickBooks model, right, is that someone who is just curious and not sure if they want to commit can get in, play around, mock something up, and they'll be like, oh, this actually would be valuable to my customers. Like, okay, I'm going to double down and do this. And the same thing, the next extension of that is the certification process around what you're showing to your customers, right? And you can have one side where it's pretty much like buyer beware, anything goes. To you have to pay $2,500 or whatever it is now to get a security review at the Salesforce App Exchange. But then other companies are like, not only am I going to do a security review, I'm going to look and make sure you're not too similar to an integration we already have in our marketplace, because we don't want to overwhelm our customer with too much choice, which is a really human thing, right? Like humans do get overwhelmed by too many options and they'll just like abandon rather than actually purchase one. So I feel like doing the research and looking at 1,000 different companies for that practice, it was definitely pretty across the board in where we are. And I think there were very few systems that were like truly like anything goes, buyer beware. But yeah, I think that that's something that, as the industry and partnerships continues to mature, which I feel like it is rapidly maturing,
Hmm.
we're going to get some more standards sort of around what that is, because it's good for the customer too, right? Because they know what to expect. Like, and I think that it will probably settle where there is some rigor, but then you have these like certified integrations that, kind of like how Shopify has like Shopify Plus, right? Like things where it went through more review, but you still have a pretty wide range where it's meeting a security element. It meets like basic branding guidelines, but it's still kind of on the partner. And, I think like us as consumers, when we go to Amazon.com, we want to know we're not going to be like defrauded or like losing our information or you're being sent like something that's total junk. But we also don't feel like Amazon needs to like vet every single business like extensively through some like 10-month business review, right? Because then the number of people listing would be dramatically cut down. So yeah, I just find that whole like question of where you fall on how open you're going to be, how hard it's going to be to get into your partner program, um, to be an interesting question. And market wide, it definitely seems like there isn't a common standard, but I feel like it's kind of evolving as we continue to have these conversations as like an industry.
Yeah, and do you think that there's like a particular company that people kind of look at as setting the stage for what that gold standard might be?
Oh, for like a partner program at scale.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've talked about quite a few different companies, through this conversation. Is there anyone that you think is like, hey, they're really doing it, and like, that's kind of where people should be setting their sights?
That's an interesting question. I'll take an easier question first, which is in terms of like the partner portal at scale experience. I will say that Salesforce and the cloud marketplaces really have the most robust partner portal experience. Like the AWS partner portal, they have like chat and support within there. They have analytics that you can get. I know they have like demographics. Like Salesforce will tell you if the customer opted in that somebody started to watch your video on your tile and then they aborted. And I think those portals are going to become sort of that experience, that more robust experience. And that's something that a tool like Pandium is designed to help mid-market companies do. Like we have like built-in analytics, so you can show that to your partners. Like here's how many people looked at your tile. And I think um, it really is only like the top 5 or 6 market portals in really SaaS that have that. Like you look at something like HubSpot or Shopify, which their portals are user friendly and they work, but they really basically have like installs. And then Shopify will have like, here's the money that you've made, but they don't have demographics. They don't tell you, hey, somebody clicked on your tile, or you know small businesses in Iowa have been really on your listing. So I think though that like if you're looking for what you could be offering in your portal for the tech partners, those companies are all great to look at and sort of look at as a model and sort of understand what you could be offering. In terms of like the partner program, I think you know HubSpot has done a really good job. Like, I think that they are really open. They're really supportive. I think it's really baked into their company as like a first principle, and that kind of shows in how they treat their partners. And I think they do a good job of, co-marketing, co-selling, enabling those opportunities. They have really good, clear API docs, and the API docs are public. Like, it's really easy to get an account as a developer and to start building and explore. And they have a lot of sort of community around to support that. So I think for that program experience, that is a good model.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Well, as we kind of wrap the conversation up, the question we always like to ask folks, what's something that you learned recently that you'd be wanting to share with listeners?
Yeah, so recently I just read a really good book that if you haven't read, I would recommend. It's called Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. And it was really fascinating in a kind of a dark way. Honestly, it was about his experience reporting on Harvey Weinstein. And I was only tangentially aware of this at the time because I read his New Yorker story, but I didn't realize that he had originally done all that reporting for NBC. And NBC had originally sort of commissioned the story, supported him going out and doing all these interviews, getting all these women to come forward and be brave and state their story, and then they killed it. And I think that they really succumbed to bad actors, Harvey Weinstein and other people who had nefarious intentions, which I actually think kind of ties back to partnerships because partnerships really run on relationships and on trust. And I think that that story kind of reminds you that even if most people are basically good and have good intentions, there are bad actors. And someone like NBC, which I don't think as an institution is a bad actor or nefarious, but they may have been neutral enough to be pressured by a bad actor to do the wrong thing. And I think, as partnerships and ecosystems grow, as an industry, we need to think about like, how do we put safeguards in place to make sure that the trust and relationship based system isn't being undermined behind closed doors by like bad actors.
Yeah, I love that. First, it's on my reading list. I can't wait to read the book. Also, I think like that really resonates, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. Even just like this reporter's out there, like they've been given the mission to do this thing. They've got the go ahead. They've built all of this trust with all of these individuals who are probably in a really tough spot and like not quick to trust anyone. And then kind of just like left hanging, like when NBC decides to kill the story. And I think like there's been a lot of folks that have been out there building partnerships, and then like the company decides to build a competitive product, or like it decides to go in a different direction on something, and they're left hanging. They've built all of this trust and like really kind of put themselves out there on the line, and even if they're not necessarily bad actors, just like can really like damage the relationship that's been built. So I love that analogy, and I can't wait to check out the book. So thank you for that. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for your time. Super, super interesting stuff, and I love all of. I could dig into the research that you've done for a really long time. I think, and I'm sure there's so much more interesting stuff there. So thank you so much, and appreciate you spending time sharing your learnings with everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, speak soon. Thank you. Bye bye.